Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Paradigm Shift podcast. Today, we're trying to justify the state.
The usual.
Hello, Eric.
Hello.
It's been a while again.
It has
Couple
been a
months.
while. We've got a good schedule going on here.
The once per 2 months, 6 episodes a year schedule.
6 episodes a year. That's like we'll be at episode 100 in no time.
It's better than zero. It's better than 0 episodes a year.
It's better than 0 episodes a year.
I've got my own voice in my ear. Okay.
Yes, you should probably close that.
I was hearing my own stream or our own stream.
Wow. Your own stream.
Professionalism. Wow. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So, do you remember what we talked about last time?
Absolutely not.
Okay. By the way, we're back with a face cam. So if anybody's watching, hopefully this creates more visual interest. Eric doesn't have one.
I don't have
because
one.
He's lame.
Oi.
But I saw a request on the first episode, a comment posted from 3 months ago. I'm very up to date with following the comment section on these videos. Are you surprised, considering our upload schedule? Yeah, from someone called Niki. So thanks to Niki. I don't know who you are. Good suggestion. So I've got a face cam now. It's not the greatest quality, but it is something.
Well, the problem with face cams is, you know what face cams cost? Money.
Yeah, not very much, I'm sure.
What?
Just get like a potato. Something's better than nothing.
Is it?
It's like in Counter-Strike. They say like, any mic is better than no mic. Like use your phone or something. But okay. So let's get into this. So last time we were talking about the state of nature. Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, their arguments. Why if we didn't have the state, life would be pretty sad. Is this ringing a bell?
I remember that.
Yeah, it would be like everybody kills each other, and then we're really sad. And then people also don't want to be killing each other because compassion. So then they're doubly sad. And such. Interesting theories about how society is the cause of all evil in the world. The classic.
We live in a society. Bottom text.
But just because it might seem that the state is to our advantage, it doesn't follow that we have the duty to follow the law, to bring it about, to shoulder the burdens that it demands from us. So this is another important topic in political philosophy. So, like, considering what are positive arguments we can make in favor of this, like, it also helps you get an understanding of when the state would lose its legitimacy, like when the people can rise up against it. It's not just like, okay, the state is always perfect. And Spiked Zen is here. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Dennis. Society.
I'm less lonely now. I told him that if he doesn't show up, I'd be lonely.
I see. The pity approach.
Yeah. And he showed up, so I guess it worked. No regrets. I'm unashamed.
You should.
It's the man himself. Eric, where's your face cam?
Well, look, that's the thing. Face cams cost money.
You're already being called out. Okay, I'll get you a face cam someday. When's your next birthday? December. I know that. I didn't need to ask you that. But I'll get you a face cam for your next birthday. I still haven't bought you a toaster. I promised I'd buy you a toaster.
You have not bought me a toaster, and I'm very offended.
To be fair, I think you didn't want a toaster last time. I was like, hey, I'd buy you a toaster. You're like, can I have money instead, please?
No,
or something.
I'm not just making me sound like a bad friend. I would absolutely love a toaster.
I'm not blaming you. Like, I'd prefer money to a toaster. Like,
one toaster, please.
Need all the money. But yeah, it's so the justifying the state. Hello, Dennis. That's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to talk about why you might have the duty to obey the law and why it's important to have an understanding of when the state is legitimate and when it is. Because if we just go, oh, the state's always all right, then that would result in us essentially agreeing with like the persecution of Jews and such,
Hell yeah.
which is
Wait, no.
not desirable generally.
I mean, yeah, hell no.
Yeah, and like censorship and anything the government does. Sometimes it's clear that the government things that are bad, so we should figure out when that's the case.
Exactly. Boom. Politics.
Yeah. Do you remember the Arab Spring of 2010 to 2012?
I do.
You do. It's when all those countries like Tunisia, Arab countries, like the name suggests, were like revolutions because we're not happy with our government. Yeah, stuff like that can happen.
Stuff like that can
So
happen.
so when should stuff like that happen? When is the government a bad boy and when is it doing well? Let's find out. Okay. So the process of justifying the state. What? Dennis says, also known as, should you oppose the god in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, or should you pay the court a fine / serve your sentence?
Halt.
You have violated the law. Pay the
Right.
court a fine or serve your sentence. Yeah, but you're right. You're right. He's got it. So justifying the state is generally considered the process of demonstrating universal political obligation. In other words, proving that everyone has the moral duty to obey the law for the reason that it's the law rather than for some individual moral justification. So what we're trying to do today is figure out if there are universal political obligations, if everybody in Finland, for example, has the duty to obey the law, or if it's the case that some of us actually just don't. So so to talk about moral duty, we have to start from some kind of moral framework. Last time we talked about like John Locke, Rousseau, and Hobbes. As I mentioned their names already, but just quick refresher. And these people were social contract theorists. So they started from assumptions like people are naturally free and equal and independent, and it's morally bad to like infringe
Restrict.
against
Yeah.
those rights for no reason. That's sort of a framework that they start off with. In politics, you always have this problem, even in political philosophy, that you sort of have to start from some assumption or you get nowhere, because we're not here to discuss meta ethics. So we're going to talk about their viewpoints. Completely fine. Many people would agree that, okay, you're free, we're equal. That seems reasonable. It can't be that you're born and or that somebody has the right to just subject you to be their slave from birth, for example. Like, surely you have the natural right to be free. Seems reasonable.
Seems sensible.
And as such, sort of their argument, the argument of these social contract theorists, is based on the idea that of consent, that you need to willingly give up your freedom in order for somebody to have power over you. And so they discuss, like, okay, in what ways do people supposedly consent to the state? Because otherwise it can't be that the state is legit in punishing you for infringing against restrictions that you don't consider yourself to have because you're free. So that's interesting. And then we'll talk about utilitarianism, because you have to.
Mm.
Founded by Jeremy Bentham. Well, he's considered the founder of modern utilitarianism, but a very important figure. They downplay the importance of autonomy, which the social contract theorists put so stress on, and instead replaces it with this other value of happiness, of pleasure, of the satisfaction of desires, whatever you please. There are many ways to define utility. They're concerned with utility, hence the name utilitarianism.
I would have never guessed.
Yeah, so for them, for the utilitarianists, the state is justified if and only if it produces more happiness than any alternative. So for the social contract theorists, it's like, okay, everybody must somehow consent to the state. We like because it affords so much respect to individuals, and people intuitively like to be respected. But then in utilitarianism, it's okay, let's just produce more happiness. So it doesn't really make a difference whether you personally like the state or not. It's more important whether the majority of people like the state. Terrible, terrible misrepresentation of utilitarian theory right there. Deal with it. So we'll consider those and some other approaches to the moral defense of the state. But first of all, Eric, what is a state?
What is a state? I'm glad you asked me this question. I have no idea.
uh, well, I'm sure you'd agree that it's some kind of political institution.
It's some form of government.
Right, so they govern, so they must claim some kind of political power over people. It's an institution that claims political power, like the power to make laws and punish people for offenses against those laws.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Seems fair. The state is generally distinguished from the nation. Oh, Dennis says, do I get to voice chat in one of these? Or are you the
No.
only host? Denied. I'd be fine with it since we're pretty chill. But maybe another time, Dennis. He can make the surprise appearance. I've talked to Dennis a lot about Turkish politics.
That could
That
actually
stuff
be an
is
interesting topic.
Yeah, that stuff is really interesting. So we could do that sometime. Okay. So we were talking about the state. It's often distinguished from the nation, which is considered more of a cultural, and whilst the state is considered a political entity, right? Like one state might in fact have multiple nations within it, like we see with what's the name of those Spanish independence that Spanish independence movement? I don't even remember. Like that little Catalonia, was it?
Cambodia? No, Catalonia. Was it Catalonia?
Okay, I should not talk about things I don't remember. But like the Scottish National Party. Dennis says I'm not qualified to talk about Turkish politics publicly. Jesus, you're
Too bad. You
Turkish.
dug
That
your own
makes you
grave.
qualified.
Look,
Right, but I, on the other hand, am fully qualified to talk about political philosophy. That's why I'm here.
look, look. We're not French, and yet we're still here talking about revolutions. You don't look. You don't need to be an expert on the matter to discuss the matter.
The French have a monopoly over. Okay, it was Catalonia. Good.
It was
The French have a monopoly over revolution. That's how that works. On the contrary, states claim a monopoly over legitimate force, generally. So the point is that you're not allowed to attack people, only the state can attack people. So that's another thing. Generally, states tend to claim political power, the right to set laws and punish offenders, and generally they tend to claim a monopoly over legitimate. But the difficulty with defining a state is that it's so hard to find a feature that is constant among all of them. You have so many different kinds of liberal democracies, benign and tyrannical dictatorships. You have different kinds of economies within them. You've got market economies, planned economies, mixed economies. You've got your communist state, and you've got your capitalist. So there are so many differences between different kinds of state that it's hard to find those shared features. And claiming a monopoly over legitimate force is even one of those features that you can't really say is the case for all states. For example, in the United States, in the US, okay, I didn't want to repeat the word state there. In the US,
In the U.S.,
people believe they have a natural, or people believe they have a right to guns, right, to self-defense with
right?
those guns.
Second Amendment.
Sometimes specifically for the reason to defend themselves against the state if need be. So the state can't possibly have a monopoly over legitimate force if they would believe they have the right to defend themselves against it legitimately. So there you go. And generally the state offers protection from illegitimate force. So, say that you can't attack people with the caveat that, okay, then we'll defend you if somebody tries to attack you, right?
Right.
So because otherwise it's a bit unfair. It's like you can't defend yourself, get killed. But that's also not something that's constant among all states. They don't necessarily offer protection to everyone from illegitimate force, as we see in states where minorities get persecuted, like Nazi Germany or still some Middle Eastern countries.
Classic.
So sometimes they even openly discriminate and attack and murder their own residents, which is sort of the opposite of that particular trait. So let's just roll with, okay, these are some things that the state, maybe the ideal state, would typically do, and pretty much all states do claim political power. That's something they do.
That's a constant.
That's pretty much a constant. I mean, if you can give me a state that has zero political features, then I'd just have to say that it's not a state, because a state is a political institution by definition. So Dennis says, did you mention that Dennis said his opinion is biased and a political discussion should not be biased? The good news for you, Dennis, is that everybody is biased to some extent. Being open about your biases is good, because then the viewers and people listening, you can take that into account. So that's, I mean, your arguments don't become less valid due to bias.
Exactly.
An argument doesn't. Facts don't care about your feelings, right? Arguments don't care about your state of mind.
If you didn't have any biases, you wouldn't have any arguments.
I don't know about that. I mean, yeah, I guess we'll just, assuming that nobody can possibly be right about politics, that might be the case. But I'm not sure I'd go and make that assumption. So let's start from social contract theorists.
Yes, those guys.
So okay, you start from the concept that everybody is free, so somehow everybody needs to consent to the state for the state to be legit. So we call this sort of universality the idea that everybody has moral obligations, and then we call this voluntarism, which is this concept that you have to give up your consent, or you have to give your consent voluntarily, from your own, by your own voluntary act. You need to consent to political power. Dennis says, all right, tell me when you're going to discuss about Turkish politics. One day.
Someday.
Maybe in 2 months, maybe in 4 months.
Maybe in a week.
Maybe, oh, you want to do another podcast in a week?
If we manage to be consistent for once.
Yeah, I'd be down. But that does require that I read the next chapter of An Introduction to Political Philosophy by Jonathan Wolff by then, because I haven't done that yet. This is the chapter I'm up to.
Right, I see.
Because I'm lazy and I don't continue reading until we do an episode on the previous stuff. Yeah. So, as we mentioned, even if it's true that the state is to your advantage, it doesn't follow that the state is justified, because you have a natural right to freedom, according to people like John Locke. Even if the state is supposedly to your advantage, you, because of your natural right to freedom, are permitted to do something that is less to your advantage. I guess you could say in this case that I'd be down in a week. Then it says read. I'm not going to say that one. Demonetization. We're not even monetized. Yeah, I was actually messaging you a few days ago. Like, Eric, I want to be monetized.
Look, it's okay. I'll bleep it out.
Okay, but I'm still not going to say it. Get ruined.
Look, I can bleep it all out in post.
But if Dennis is down in a week, then look, the next chapter in the book isn't about Turkish politics. Like, we wouldn't be talking about Turkish politics, you know.
I mean, we can do it. Just like, it doesn't have to be next episode.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about Turkish politics next episode to give me more time to read. But the next next episode will be about. But the next episode will be about democracy, so that will be fun. Well, the next chapter in the book will be about democracy. So when we do that episode, haha, I said do, then that will be interesting.
Ooh, democracy! I like that. That's a good thing.
But yeah, I mean, after this series of episodes, we can do a series of episodes on modern politics. Yay!
Ooh, my favorite.
Okay, we are making much too slow progress. So let's get this show on the road.
All right, let's talk about the actual topic at hand.
So, According to John Locke, a state that exercises political power over me without my consent is illegitimate. That seems logical, yeah?
That makes sense.
Unless we subscribe to utilitarianism. But we'll get to that. I'm gonna. Fine. I'm gonna read Dennis's messages. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop imagining that I have a say in the schedule of this podcast. Yeah, you have no say. We are the hosts here.
All right.
And we will make episodes every 2 months if you want to. So
back to the topic at hand. Yes.
So the point being that probably if John Locke knew about utilitarianism, he would say that liberty is more important than happiness sometimes. But that's another sort of really meta-ethical issue. So let's put that aside and let's look at the political philosophy. So if it can be shown that everybody just consents to the state of their own free will, then that's an elegant solution. That's an elegant solution to the problem of universal political obligations, because not only does everybody have the duty to obey the law because they give themselves those duties, but it is in fact okay. I meant that there's the everybody, and then there's the it's a voluntary act. I sort of put them into the same sentence there, unintentional. But yeah, it's that would be good. That would make our lives easy.
That would make things easy, yes. Sadly,
Is it
when it
gonna be
comes to
easy?
philosophy, it's never easy.
You know it's not going to be easy. So there are different forms of consent theory. You've got explicit consent, you've got tacit consent, you've got hypothetical consent. Those are the ones we're going to look at. So firstly, the easiest one, explicit consent. Okay, is it the case, Eric, that everybody in Finland has explicitly consented to the government? Like
Absolutely
they've gone
not.
out and signed a declaration that says, I consent to the government.
I don't believe I've gotten opt-out to check in the mail, no.
Yeah, for some reason, I don't remember being asked that question either. I don't remember anybody walking up to me and being like, hey, you wanna be governed? And me being like, oh yeah, I wanna be governed. No, I don't remember that. So explicit consent seems like it fails. Now it is the case that sometimes children, for example, are made to quote unquote consent, like the American Pledge of Allegiance. They have to recite this whole pledge of allegiance to the flag and whatnot. But they're not really given a choice, and they're not old enough for their pledge to have legal standing, or for them to even understand.
Yeah, that's just like something that's really strange to me, and like not enough people talk about it.
Yeah. What is this brainwashing?
What is this like? This is borderline cultish.
This is indoctrination. Yeah. It is. I'm not sure I get it either, but I'm not American. And it's not worth a discussion here. I mean, does it have tangible harm? Maybe, but not worth it.
Yeah.
So, another thing that's often observed is that people in modern states, sometimes people who immigrate to modern states, during the naturalization process, give their consent in order to gain citizenship, which I guess is something, but the vast majority of ordinary citizens are generally left untouched.
Right.
So
yeah. I guess by that theory, you could technically say, because I've applied for citizenship and all that, you could say that I do consent to the Finnish state.
Yeah, I suppose.
Explicitly, that is.
But I don't. How old are you when you moved to Finland?
Like 10?
Yeah, I don't know. Philosophers might have a say about whether you were old enough to understand the implications.
Well, no, I moved here when I was 10, but I've gone through like the entire process of actually applying for it like this year.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
Because you have to be here
I'm sure you consider yourself a rational agent, so.
Right.
Wait a second, you're not 18 yet. You're 17.
Yeah, no,
okay.
you just have to be in Finland for 7 years to be able to apply for that.
Okay, gotcha. So, explicit consent doesn't apply to everyone. It doesn't apply to me, for example. I can still go out and protest the government. but there's this concept of tacit consent. So, for example, you might consider that voting. In voting for the government, you give it your consent. So you consent via the ballot box, so to speak, which is an idea. I don't think it's a credible idea, because some people who vote for the government just do so because they prefer it over the alternative of some other person getting into power. It might be
Right.
that they prefer even more the third alternative of nobody being in power, but that's not an option that you can vote for.
Right.
So
I don't think ballots have like a little terms and regulations like check mark in the bottom.
yeah, I don't think it has like the anarchy option, which is ridiculous. All you can do is vote for a candidate. You can't vote for like anarchy. Ridiculous.
I know, right?
Completely
Ridiculous.
undemocratic. Completely undemocratic. We
This is
can't even
silly.
vote on our own government. Outrageous. Yeah, but not only do some people who vote for the government not consent by their voting, many people abstain or strictly voted against the people who ended up in power. So how can you say that they're consenting to the power over them, especially if you abstain and don't vote at all? Still, it's like at least half the population that does that. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate amount of the population that doesn't vote.
Yeah, well, it depends. I don't actually personally have qualms with people not voting if they don't consider themselves educated
I
on the
mean,
topic.
yeah, that's for sure, but like, I don't think most people have that type of mindset when they don't vote.
Yeah, I mean, of course, best case scenario, everybody educates themselves, because that's how democracy is supposed to work. The more people you have with an over 50% chance of making the right decision, the closer the odds get to 100% that as a collective you're going to make the right decision. Like, if you have 10,000 people in an electorate and each one has like a 51% chance to make the right choice out of two people, like we assume they're rational, then um, there's like an almost exactly 100% chance. It's like 99.9 ridiculousness percent chance that they make the right, just mathematically speaking. So, okay, it would be the larger the electorate, the likelier you are to make the right decision, assuming people are rational. So the best case scenario, people get educated and then they vote. But if you're uneducated, then voting is only counterproductive. So that's my view on things. Try to educate yourselves and go vote. But if you don't consider yourself educated, then I don't have a problem with you not doing so. Okay. So it doesn't really make sense that people vote through the ballot. So what other forms of tacit consent theory are there? Well, all the major social contract theorists, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, rely on a form of tacit consent argument, where the central thought is that by quietly enjoying the protection of the state, you're giving it your consent. So by sitting there at home and being protected by the laws, you're giving your consent. What do you think about that?
Uh, Interesting.
You think there's probably a problem, right?
Yes. I'm trying to
Because
figure out what it is.
because otherwise we wouldn't be here. Because it's only been 30 minutes. It would just be like, roll credits.
Do you have the moral duty to obey the law? No. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da.
Or rather, yes, in this case, if the fact that residence is consent, then everybody who lives in the state is consenting. If that thesis is correct, then it would be that everybody has the moral duty. And that's just it. Roll credits.
Okay.
So, what might be the problem with this? Well, I guess the idea behind it is that people can leave if they don't want to have the burdens of the state, right? Like if you remain in the borders and you are hence accepting the benefits of the state and its burden. Because if you didn't want them, you could just leave. That's probably the idea,
Right.
right? Because why else would your just location be considered consent? Unless leaving could be like an act of expressing your what's the opposite of consent?
Uh,
Opposition. Doesn't matter.
let's go for that one.
Let's move on. So the problem here in the modern world is that if you leave, you're just entering another state.
Exactly.
So where would you go? It's hard to say that simply by being here and thus getting benefits and burdens, you're consenting, because you don't really have the option to reject those benefits, unless you were to leave. But by leaving, where would you go apart from another state with an equally objectionable regime?
Right. Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem I had. I mean, there's maybe like a few hundred years ago, that could have
Yeah.
been a reasonable argument, but right now there's a bit of a lack of space, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable that back in the day when you had like city-states, like Greek city-states, somebody might literally be able to walk outside the walls and live in nature.
Exactly,
But
someone could just like build a hut in the forest.
doing that is a bit more challenging nowadays. I mean, you can do it as long as you don't break any laws, but you're
But
still
the problem
gonna
with
have to
that
pay your
is,
taxes.
yeah, I was gonna say the problem with that is, if you want to go do that, you're gonna have to get like a property lease. You're gonna have to buy out the land.
This is my own nation. Well, that guy who's floating like in the English channel, oh, that little platform, that micronation.
Right.
That's a solution for you.
That's a solution. Just get like an, yeah, exactly. Sea land, what's it called?
Start your own micronation.
On like an oil rig.
Yeah, but even so, there are many other things that might bind you to your home, apart from just that you have nowhere to go. Like your family is here, and your property is here, and sometimes leaving would put you under threat of violence. Maybe not in Finland, but in some more questionable regimes. So it's not even just that where would you go, it's also like it's not reasonable to expect someone to give all this up in order to leave. They don't really have the freedom to leave if it would cost them that much,
Exactly. I feel
right?
like, if your idea of consent considers like implications that you'll have to lose out on things that weren't like, that aren't implicitly part of said consent, then that's
Hmm.
like an invalid view of said consent.
Yeah, yeah, and that's important about this consent theory and tacit consent theory, is that it's in utilitarianism you'd just say that the benefits that you're getting are the reason why the state is justified. That's the reason you have the moral duty to it. But in consent theory, it's like the benefits mean that you are consenting, and that means that you have the moral duty. It's just like an extra step that makes it harder. So, because you have to deal with the whole consent aspect rather than just looking at benefits. Um,
Right.
so, so tacit consent, in the end, we can say that one ends up failing as well. So, the last version of consent theory I mentioned was hypothetical consent. So, prepare your brain for some
Uh-oh.
serious philosophy.
Hypothetical consent already sounds concerning.
Yep, it sounds like something you'd use to justify raping.
Exactly. That I'm like
Like,
so concerned about what you're
yeah,
about to
well,
say.
if I had asked for their consent,
Look,
they would have
the
said yes. So
the
I.
implication.
Okay, Eric. I didn't even I see when I was reading, I didn't consider this aspect. It's actually a funny parallel to, but yeah. So the idea is that if there wasn't a state, everybody would still rationally and freely join a contract to bring about one, because they'd recognize how terrible their situation is, so they would give their consent to create a state.
Right.
So that's the purpose of hypothetical consent, is to ask you, like, hey, well, what would you give it your consent in that situation? And then you'd be like, oh yeah, I guess I would.
I guess I
And then
would.
and then and then they're like, boom, I guess you consent then. And you're like, oh, I guess I do. But it's weird, because it's just it does indicate that you sort of have a disposition to consent. Like, if somebody were to ask you, you would consent, which it has obvious objections. But before we get to the obvious objections, I'm sure you can think of a few, even if you'd have trouble articulating them. Let me point out that in hypothetical consent, the idea is not even that you sort of come to realize that you consent, but that you come to realize that you've always consented. So the idea is that people can have beliefs held that they hold subconsciously, like that giraffes don't have 9 legs. You've probably always thought that, but you've never consciously formed the thought itself. So the idea is that people have always consented to the state. They've just never stopped to think about if they do. And hypothetical consent is like a thought experiment that demonstrates that, yeah, you have always consented to the state. So, what's the obvious objection, Eric?
Um,
So the problem with this, I know, is that it's so abstract that you don't even know where to start. Like, I
Yeah.
can tell you how somebody would object, but because you haven't got practice with philosophical argumentation, you, like, even though it's an obvious objection, like, you wouldn't be able to articulate it or why it works. So
Exactly. Like your brain throws up the like warning signs, the red lights. It's like ding ding ding, this is wrong, but you don't know how to say it.
exactly, it's like, that makes no sense. I have the same problem sometimes, because I still sometimes, like, on the Reddit philosophy pages, the most academically demanding area of philosophical discourse. I sometimes have people write huge paragraphs, and I don't even understand your argument. So it's, how do I respond? I mean, you come to a conclusion that says something ridiculous that I don't
Ex-
agree with, but I
yeah.
don't understand how you got there. So I'm gonna need you to change your formulation before I can even respond.
Exactly. Sometimes somebody just says something so stupid that you don't know how to respond with anything other than like, bruh.
Like, now, without delving too far into politics, now this is a standard debate topic,
No, no,
or
no.
a technique. Ben Shapiro.
Keep politics out of this political podcast.
No. But we can't show bias. We can't be like, Ben Shapiro has no good arguments. He just rambles. That's not acceptable.
That's
We
not
need to
accept.
seem like
It's correct, but it's not acceptable.
we need to get the viewership of those right wing conservatives.
Do we?
We need uh well, anything to get monetized. Dennis chimes in with, ding dong, your opinion is wrong. But yeah, I mean, you just ramble on and come to a conclusion, and the other guy can't see the progression of the argument, so they doesn't know where it fails, because it seems like the links just don't connect. But I'll tell you I'll explain where the link doesn't connect for this, which is, firstly, that some people don't have a disposition to consent. You can't just say everybody has a disposition to consent, because some people actually explicitly oppose dissent. Dissent, that's the word, because some people actually explicitly dissent, like anarchists. How
Hmm.
can you say that if we had no state, then they would consent, when they have already gone through that whole thought experiment and go, oh yeah, having no state would be right?
Right.
Secondly, a disposition to consent is usually not considered binding. It's a really weak sense of consent. Like when it comes to rape, which is a really good example. Generally, we don't consider it legally binding. If you had been asked, you would have consented, because nobody knows.
Yeah, I feel like it's turning consent into like a mind game, and you shouldn't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, it's not good in practice and it's not good in theory because there's no way that you guarantee that everybody agrees. Not everybody is just going to agree that they would consent to the state if they were not in a state of nature. People aren't that uniform.
Aha, I've tricked you into consenting. Now you must agree with me.
So, while hypothetical consent may have some success in the sense that it brings people or it allows people, brings people to realize that they do consent to the state via a thought experiment, it can't possibly prove that people who don't go through the thought experiment should be assumed to be consenting because it's completely possible that they dissent after they go through the thought experiment. So you can't just go, okay, but you hypothetically consent. It's like, no.
Never agree to
No.
this? No? Hypothetically, I consent, but I do not consent.
I equally hypothetically dissent, you could say. I'm sure an anarchist would point that out.
Mm-hmm.
You may as well equally hypothetically dissent because the existence of people who openly dissent proves that people can reasonably come to that conclusion.
I love how much we refer to anarchism in these podcasts.
Yeah, it's because talking about the very foundations of political philosophy is strongly related to anarchism.
Yeah, I feel like it's
Because
like a strong extreme to compare stuff with. Extreme isn't
um
the right word. I mean, like,
well, it
I
is
mean,
sort of
it's a strong stance.
it's an extreme in the sense that in a dichotomy both options are an extreme.
Yeah.
State versus no state. If you believe in no state, then I mean, if we consider that extreme, then
Yeah, if we're
Eric,
talking
you're
about,
also extreme.
I mean, I guess, yeah, if we're talking about the state, then the perfect opposite would be anarchism.
Yeah, but that's why we are talking to it. It's not like we're just gonna ignore anarchism and be like, oh yeah, they're just irrational. You have been advertised on the most important social media platform, Snapchat. Yo, we're
Incredible.
gonna get them
Dude, we've
views.
got that Snapchat clout.
Should should we put this? Should I put this on Facebook?
We should put this on MySpace, dude.
We should put this on MySpace, dude. Dude.
Well, we'd have a
We could
Twitter
get so
account, but
many
I got
views.
that one banned.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you, like, hey, did you ever
Nope.
get that account back? It's still on our background as well. It's like go to our Twitter,
Yeah, I should make a
even
new
though there
one.
isn't one.
I should make a new
Yeah,
one.
you should. You should. Yeah.
Having a Twitter seems useful.
I'm actually thinking that eventually, maybe even for this episode, I will start advertising our podcast a little more, like sending it to friends and on Facebook and stuff. But
We
you know,
should.
I have to feel confident first that the quality is up to par, and for
Right.
that reason, we're going to talk about anarchism more.
Yeah, I feel like we should get the quality up, and I feel like we should also, get an actual regular schedule if we want to do this.
Sure. So maybe once a week is challenging, but like once every 2 weeks.
Something like that.
Dennis says we should put this on IRC Galleria.
We should put this on AIM.
I don't know what either of those are.
MSN Messenger.
Okay, that one I recognize. Anarchism, Eric.
Anarchism.
Anarchism. So hypothetical consent seems to fail, which means that all the consent theories don't show that everybody has political obligation, even if it does show it for some people. And it's still a troubling thought to consider that some people in Finland right now are not subject to the law, or should not be subject to the law. So let's consider, what if that is in fact the case? Let's because voluntarism seems reasonable, right? That people have a natural right to freedom, so they have to consent to create legitimate power relations. So maybe we should just bite the bullet and say that for some people, the state acts illegitimately.
Right.
Is that a problem?
Is that worth it? Yeah.
It could be. It could be that it's worth it. It could be that in practice we can't possibly do anything about it. Like, because if suddenly the state starts omitting some people from punishment, then everybody will try to pass themselves off as such people, even if they do believe that the state would, and everybody following the law would be beneficial, even if they believe that they have the moral duty to follow the law. Not everybody will act morally. They'll just they'll try to pass themselves off as these people who don't have a duty to obey the law, and as such try to benefit from that.
Exactly. So people are going to try and find a way to exploit all of this. I feel like it has to be either one or the other, either like full state or no state.
Yeah. I actually talk about this because I do have some notes because that's how professional I am. I put something about this in the conclusion. So at the end, we're gonna have or we're gonna comment shortly on the case if like what we can do to maximize people or to maximize the state's ability to omit people from the law. If we accept that some people do escape the law. So that because that stuff is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But it does give renewed support to the anarchist case that some people just can't be shown to consent. And it's actually I think I consider it a pretty good anarchist weapon. Like right now, if I went out and I was like, um, anarchy is true, change my mind, then this is what I'd tell people. I'd be like, okay, bud, I've never consented to the state, and therefore the state, and by extension the police, act illegitimately by exercising power over me. They are acting unjustly by exercising power over me. My throat is sore and I'm almost out of water.
That is concerning.
That is concerning. And if we accept that anarchist argument, then it seems that the only reason to obey is prudence. Or to because you're afraid of punishment.
Hmm.
You don't want to be punished, so you obey, even if you consider that you don't have to be obeying, that you have no moral obligation to. Or I guess another reason to obey would be because you independently morally agree with that law. Like if the law is don't kill somebody, it might well be that you still agree with that morally, which I would hope you would.
Guys, where's my murder supporters in chat? Come on.
Yet if we accept that line of reasoning and everybody's like, okay, so I only obey with the laws, or I only obey the laws that I agree with, then we just end up in the situation where it's as if there were no laws, because people are just acting in accordance with their own personal interests or opinions. Like it's some rich people have strong qualms with steep progressive taxation, so they'll just stop paying taxes because they don't morally agree with that. And some people might consider inherited property morally reprehensible. Like you didn't deserve that property, you didn't
Right.
do anything to deserve it, and suddenly a large amount of property in the world goes completely unrespected. Like that property is equally mine as it is yours. Neither of us deserves it. So I may as well take some of it. You should spread the wealth. So you can see how everybody just ends up acting according to their own volitions if everybody thought like this, and we just get the state of nature all over again. We get Hobbesian war, yeah. So, okay, one anarchist objection would be to say, but everybody will actually come to share the same set of moral principles. But I mean, I don't see that reasonably happening. Everybody
Yeah, no.
will always, there are always going to be people even if there is a set of true moral principles, which again we're avoiding meta ethics, but not at all obvious.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that everyone will agree will never come to fruition ever in any argument.
Yeah.
You could bring up any topic. Again,
Yep.
murder, you could bring that up. I'm sure some people would advocate it.
Or at the very least, they'd advocate that it's not morally wrong
Yeah,
because
some
they
people
believe
would
that
be.
there aren't moral truths.
Yeah, some people would be less or more inclined to murder.
Yeah. So, so the anarchist perspectives, even though they just got a weapon, we gave them a nice little weapon. It still seems undesirable in practice, whatever its theoretical merits. So let's look for another option. Maybe content theory isn't the way to go. Maybe instead of liberty being the prime value, it should be happiness. Yeah?
Yeah, being happy.
You've been to ethics class with me. You must know what utilitarianism is, right?
Absolutely, it's the thing where you maximize the happy.
Yeah, let's explain it shortly to the viewers, even though I mentioned it already earlier. So, there are many kinds of moral theory. There's altruism, which is like it's morally good to do what benefits, um,
Everyone.
what benefits everyone else, I believe. And so, like you take yourself out of the equation. Then there's egoism, which is like it's morally good to do what benefits me. And then there's utilitarianism, which is it's morally good to do what benefits everyone in the largest sum quantity. And by benefits in this case, we mean happiness, we mean pleasure, we mean the satisfaction of desires, we mean utility. That's sort of the encompassing term of all of that. So, finally, a discussion on utilitarianism. This is really interesting because it's such a influential doctrine. It's maybe the most influential doctrine. We've talked about it a lot in ethics class even. It's like people care about utilitarianism. But utilitarianism requires some questionable situations, to put it mildly.
Right.
First of all, the core problem in utilitarianism is called interpersonal comparisons of utility. The problem of interpersonal comparisons of utility. Can you guess what that means?
Different things make different people happy.
Good guess. What it means is comparing how happy people are, really. So for utilitarianism to be the case, for the concept of maximizing happiness to be logical, you have to be able to make sense of statements like John is 3 times happier than Kate, but yesterday he was only 2 times happier, and such. You see, you have to be able to quantify happiness,
Right.
which many people consider a problem.
Yeah, I don't think that's a thing,
Well,
generally.
solutions exist, or at least proposed solutions, but we can't go into them because they be complex, and that would take some time. But just know that intuitively, we can sort of measure happiness. Like you know that some people derive more happiness from watching a certain film than you do, right? Like it's their favorite film, whilst for you it's just so meh kind of film.
Hmm.
So if you watch it, it seems that they derive more happiness from that. So you can sort of say that they got more out of it in terms of happiness. Like you can make these comparisons intuitively speaking. So it would make sense that it's possible, even if it's hard, to quantify happiness. Like a certain food that you dislike might, well, it definitely wouldn't make you happy eating it, but it would make somebody else happy. So, and you can recognize that.
Right.
So it's interesting. And of course, there are people, you recognize that there are people living in misery. There are homeless people on the streets who are very unhappy. There are rich people who are very happy, although sometimes they're also very unhappy. And sometimes the poor people are also very happy. But
Yeah,
you
because
can recognize
happiness
that people,
generally tends to be relative.
yeah, you can see that people are miserable and people are happy. So, okay, happiness tends to be relative. Hmm, sure. So you can see that intuitively, happiness seems to be relative. So it seems that you can rank everybody in terms of happiness. Seems
Well, I mean, not
intuitively.
exactly. I mean, more just like in the sense that, like somebody who was poor once and is rich now would be a lot happier than someone who's been rich their entire life.
Okay, that's what you meant by
About
happiness
like,
is relative.
yeah, it's relative to what you've experienced.
Okay, I thought you meant it's relative between people, or yeah, but which would be rather obvious. But yeah, I suppose that is, yeah, yeah. I'm inclined to agree. I'm not a utilitarian. I'm no expert on the matter, but it definitely seems that people who ascend to wealth are happier than people who descend from wealth. So there's that. But okay, let's put that problem aside. Just wanted to point out that intuitively it seems possible, so we don't have to go into the proposed solutions to the problem. And let's just talk about the rest of utilitarianism. So they say the state is justified if and only if it generates more happiness than any alternative, or the lack of an alternative, or like the lack of a state.
Right.
Um, and you should obey the law if and only if that generates more happiness than it would cost. Now, there's already a problem that some people might recognize with this, which is that it seems to promote breaking the law quite a lot of the time. Can you think of a situation where you would get a lot of happiness from breaking the law without really costing anyone anything?
I mean, you could argue some forms of like corporate fraud.
Maybe, like nobody was missing that money.
Yeah, like
Or
corporate fraud or embezzlement. It's like
yeah,
if no one knows you're doing it, then you're not deriving any unhappiness from it.
yeah, you actually hit really close to a very central objection to utilitarianism known as scapegoatism, which we'll get to in a moment. But in more practical terms, let's say your child is starving.
Uh-oh.
Is it morally right to steal the food to feed the child if you have no money? Stuff like that. Clearly, saving a life will generate a great deal of happiness, especially for that child and for yourself, while stealing um, that, I don't know, what did you steal? That loaf of bread will not hurt the baker or the business or the people working in that business very much at all. Okay, we lost a loaf of bread, big deal, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, so, hold on a second. Is it the case that utilitarianism doesn't justify, or doesn't justify the state? Does it provide moral, political obligations? Well, we can develop utilitarianism further.
Uh-oh.
There's a concept called indirect utilitarianism. So you know of the prisoner's dilemma, I'm sure.
Right.
Now consider this. For that woman, or man, I don't judge. Why, what? Look at me, I'm sexist. I assumed that that the person stealing the
The
food for the
first.
child would
Yeah.
be a mother. Great,
Wow, dude.
great.
Dude, I
Hey,
can't
to be
believe
fair,
you're.
no, no,
I,
no, no, no. It was statistically speaking, it must be the case
I
that there are
can't
more
believe
single
you're
mothers than
anti-male.
single fathers, right? It must be the case.
I can't believe you're anti-male, dude.
Womp womp. But okay, that
Yes.
person stealing the food, it seems to be acting rationally to maximize happiness.
Right.
But if everybody acted rationally to maximize happiness, then that individual instance would spread to quite a few individual instances. People stealing all sorts of things because the businesses hurt much less than the pleasure that you derive from stealing that thing. So suddenly, it's actually the case that property becomes extremely insecure, and everybody's very unhappy and it actually creates a great deal of depression that property becomes so unstable, and many people are going around stealing things and creating these minor instances where if nobody else was doing it, it would be fine. But in the sum, when everybody's doing it, suddenly nobody can be confident about the property they own. Somebody might be breaking into your house any moment now to steal your stuff because he needs the money to live and you don't. And that creates a great deal of unhappiness, a real great deal, so much so that people say that the collective happiness has gone down. So this is the idea of indirect utilitarianism, like the prisoner's dilemma, where if the prisoners cooperate and just don't sell each other out, they get a sum total of 2 years imprisonment, for example. They would benefit in some, but the individual actions, the actions that are individually rational, would create a lot more unhappiness in some. Like for you, it might be rational to sell the other prisoner out, and thus they get 3 years of imprisonment. But in some, that's still worse than if you both got 1 year of imprisonment, hence getting a sum total of 2 years of imprisonment, for example. So, does that seem reasonable?
More or less.
So, that gives us some ideas. First of all, according to the utilitarian, laws should be passed if and only if they contribute more to human happiness than any competing law or the absence of a law would. Secondly, laws should be obeyed because they are laws, and they will be obeyed because disobedience means punishment. Difference between should and will there. So the reason you should obey the law is not for any independent moral reasoning, but because those restrictions are important so that the collective can be happy. And you will end up obeying it, even if you don't recognize that you should. You will end up obeying it because otherwise you'll be punished by the law. And that's sort of the reason for the law. Thirdly, laws should be repealed and replaced if they fail to serve the proper utilitarian function.
Right.
So these are some ideas. But the whole argument would be roundabout premise 1, the morally best society is the one in which happiness is maximized. Premise 2, the state promotes happiness better than the state of nature. Premise 3, the state and the state of nature are the only alternatives we have. Therefore, conclusion, we have a moral duty to bring about and support this. Did you catch that?
Yep. We've solved it. But that's just a theory.
But
Game
that's
theory.
a game theory.
Thanks
Yes,
for watching.
Did you end the stream?
Buy Audible now.
We're
Can sponsored by NordVPN.
We can't get views, but we can't get monetized, but maybe we can get sponsored. That's how that works.
Speaking of Audible, NordVPN.
Get it now.
Sponsored by Dashlane.
I haven't actually heard of that last one.
Well, it looks like you need to up your hearing skills. And you can up your hearing skills by going to Skillshare.com.
Eric, we've been going for an hour and 6 minutes. Let's get this over with.
Okay.
Let's get this over with. So, anarchists would generally disagree with premises 2 and 3. 2, that the state promotes happiness better than the state of nature. And 3, that the state and the state of nature are the only alternative we have. Right?
Right.
But, accepting those, okay, it seems that the state promotes happiness better than the state of nature, and it sure seems that the state and the state of nature are the only alternatives we have. So let's look at premise 1, that the morally best society is the one in which happiness is maximized. Okay?
Right.
Let's look at that one. So, the scapegoat objection that I mentioned earlier is that utilitarianism seems to justify innocent people being imprisoned and punished. How does it do that? So, the idea with utilitarianism being maximization of utility, it has the result that in some cases, doing something that people would consider unjust and an offense against natural rights might produce more happiness. In the sense, consider this example. A terrorist attack happens in a major city. A very serious terrorist attack. Now, the state is unable to find the culprits. People are worried. People are severely depressed by the fact that terrorist attacks can happen anywhere at any time. People can die, they could die, and the state can't even prevent or stop and punish the perpetrators. So, the state takes a random dude off the street and says, "This guy did it, we got him,"
We
and
did it,
throws
Reddit.
him in jail. Now, if nobody ever finds out that that man was innocent, then the millions of people in the country whose happiness just increased by a greater deal might outweigh the happiness of this one dude who just has to live in prison now for the rest of his life. Serious but national security, on the scale of so many goddamn people demonetized, might be worth it. So the way this argues against premise one, obviously, that the morally best society is the one in which happiness is maximized, is to point out that utilitarianism itself, the principle of utility itself, is flawed. That happiness is not the prime value and should not be held as the prime value, because it can't possibly be just that some people can be made into scapegoats to benefit the some happiness in the world. So, the utilitarian might try to defend against that by using the same indirect utilitarian argument. They'd say, oh, if we know we're living in a society where people can be imprisoned for being, that innocent people can be imprisoned, then that will make us all really depressed because we might, who knows, we might be the next person who's imprisoned despite being innocent, and we can see all the injustice in the world. And I've corrected it now for a strong central democracy. If not, then I'll be Socrates throwing verbal.
Niki, you're getting distracted.
Sorry. But again, that argument just misses the point. That the scapegoatism works if it's highly efficient and secret. Does this seem reasonable so far?
I mean, doesn't seem unreasonable.
So you'd agree that in some cases it does seem that a scapegoat, and according to utilitarianism, would be morally justified.
That's a tough question. I'm gonna go.
What about the example I gave? Do you feel that the one dude, the one dude who was innocently imprisoned, the loss of happiness that he experienced outweighs the gain in happiness of all the people in the country for national security?
I mean,
It could be. I don't know. Again,
idea.
mainly because it's hard to measure happiness.
I mean, again, there's just the idea that if, like, you'd have to be really consistent if anyone ever found out that they were doing this, it would be a problem.
But if you assume that it is in fact highly efficient and secret, it seems justified. Like, just imagine that there is in fact a state being highly efficient and secret about this. seems that it's justified. Um, it's hard for us to again to compare happiness, but just a country like okay, let's take why not take like India because they've got billions of people, so it's even greater impact, right? A billion is a really big number,
That is
and
sizable.
so you'd be reasonably worried, right? If let's say Rautatien tori, yeah, in Helsinki was blown up and
Good.
100 people died or more,
Mm.
and the state was unable to find the culprit. Like, you'd be reasonably worried that terrorist attacks are coming to Finland, that I might die, that the state is helpless, and I think you would get a reasonable amount of relief from the culprit being arrested. So with that like amount of relief multiplied by a billion, outweigh. I mean, a billion is a big number. It's a
And
big number.
it is. It is.
So let's put that objection aside. Okay, you're not completely convinced. So let's take another objection against utilitarianism. The utility monster.
But
Utilitarian. So okay. Some people derive more happiness from the same things as other people, right? As we mentioned earlier, it seems
mm,
from foods, movies, preferences. If you imagine an entity that derives so much pleasure, like more pleasure than everybody else in the world combined by a lot from consuming items, not even any item in particular, just items, then utilitarianism would justify all of us giving everything to it
uh,
and just sitting here on Earth and withering away.
this seems like a slightly flawed approach.
Why?
But okay, first off, this seems like a very hypothetical concept.
It is.
That if you stretch the definite, like if you really just like push the boundaries of what utilitarianism is, then sure you could have this sort of extreme case argument.
In what way are we pushing the boundaries of utilitarianism?
Well, I mean, you're getting this very hypothetical situation that like is very unrealistic to actually happen in real life.
Why is that a problem? Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, so some people would object that okay, utilitarianism doesn't work all the time, but it's a good practical tool because only impossible hypothetical scenarios are a challenge to it, right?
Right.
So that's a reasonable thing to say. Like, okay, utilitarianism isn't true, but it's a good practical tool. Now, I think that's a whole different ballpark. It's a whole new can of worms we'd be open by turning into a practical tool that people should pretend that utilitarianism is true. So, but that's a reasonable way to go about it. Another objection to the utility monster is that because it's because we can't imagine what it would be like to be the utility monster. Our intuition that it would be morally wrong to give everything to the utility monster, which conflicts with utilitarianism, can't be trusted. So some hardcore utilitarians just go, yeah, it would be morally right to give everything to the utility monster. Yes. And others are like, what? You'd condemn all these people to death for this one entity's supreme happiness? And he's just like, yeah, because you don't understand that because you can't imagine such a great amount of happiness. You can't. Your intuition that this is morally wrong is incorrect. In fact, it is morally right, or it could well be morally right, and you just don't see it because you can't imagine the amount of pleasure that this dude is getting. You know?
I don't know. It just feels like it lacks nuance that way.
So that's another objection.
It's interesting.
I personally I do prefer the scapegoat objection. So, just for the sake of completion, a third deeper objection is that which would be related to the scapegoat argument, is that no one should be victimized, no matter what the result in terms of happiness. It's like even if you somehow like manage to justify it in terms of happiness, which as we saw was really hard. It's really hard to figure out. Okay, is this one dude's loss of happiness as valuable as a billion people's some small amount of gain in happiness? Like, does the maths work? It's really hard to figure out. And someone who believes in natural rights would just say, no, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be looking at happiness at all. It's even if you get to the right conclusion, you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. No one should be victim, even if it did give a gain in happiness. So that's one claim, which would also need to be justified. But it's interesting. In fact, rights in general are really interesting. I actually have John Stuart Mill's um, utilitarianism. What on liberty? On liberty. I have his On Liberty, which is a work in which he gives a utilitarian argument for natural rights, which is extremely interesting. I want to read it, but I haven't yet because I've got other books that I'm in the middle. But yeah, so this stuff is complicated, as you might imagine. Welcome to another episode of the Paradigm Shift podcast, where we are unable to come to any conclusions.
We only talk about simple stuff here, definitely.
But I must admit, Eric, that without having read Mr. Mill's On Liberty, Utilitarianism, and other writings, it does seem that utilitarianism is dubious at best due to the scapegoat objection. So whether or not you're convinced, it's not really my duty to prove to you that utilitarianism is wrong. It's the utilitarian's duty to prove to you that he's right. That's his burden, and I don't see that the scapegoat problem is comfortably dealt with. It's not it's not dealt with in a sufficient manner for me to be convinced that they fulfilled their burden of. So let's move on.
Right.
And without in the future, I'm happy to study utilitarianism more closely. I really want to. But for now, with this rudimentary basic overload, let's assume that it has some flaws and see our last argument in favor of the state. So this is called the principle of fairness, which was stated by H.L.A. Hart, who is a philosopher, a 20th century philosopher. So, recent people. 1907 to 92, I have his life written
Autobiography.
down here. Yeah, I have the years through which he lived.
Ah, that's a
written
crap
here.
autobiography.
Yeah, that's all I've got. The idea of the principle of fairness is that whether or not individuals consent to the state, it can seem unfair for them to enjoy the benefits of the state without shouldering any of the necessary burdens that produce those benefits. So, let's quote H.L.A. Hart. He says, "When any number of persons conduct any joint enterprise according to rule, and thus restrict their liberty, those who have submitted to these restrictions, when required, have a right to similar submission from those who have benefited by their submission," which is a mouthful.
I understood maybe half of that.
So the part or what I said earlier is maybe easier to comprehend. The idea is that people have come together to create the state. It's producing lots of benefit. People here obeying the laws is good for you because it means that they don't steal your property or kill you and stuff. And thus, because you accept those benefits, you have the burden to obey the law in return to help create those benefits for other people and for yourself. So, Hart considers this the rational core of the doctrine of tacit consent that we talked about earlier, because the idea there was that receiving benefits binds you to the state because it's a way of consenting to the state. But the idea here is that receiving benefits binds you to the state because it's only fair that in return you shoulder the burdens that create those benefits. This is the sort of question you might be asked in like an Oxford interview. Is like, what do you think fairness is and how it manifests in society? Because I don't know.
I don't know. Does anyone
But
know?
I'm sure people have ideas about what fairness is, but I haven't studied them. All I know about it is this, the principle of fairness. So I guess if I was in an interview, then that's the sort of thing I would talk about. Be like, yes, well, the principle of fairness, theorized by H.L.A. Hart, seems to consider fairness to be this idea that you have the moral burdens or the moral duty to accept burdens that create benefits that you enjoy, or something like that. So that must be that seems intuitively reasonable. That's what fairness means. It's this idea of returning the favor.
Passing the
But
buck
yeah,
on.
but again, another doctrine that is morally challenging, at least for me. I haven't studied a lot of meta ethics, but I've studied so enough that I feel like everything needs to be more strongly justified than this. You say that people have a duty of fairness in these situations. Why? Why? And then they're like, well, you see, here's an example, okay? You're at the bar, yeah? And then you're with three of your friends, yeah? And then those friends each buy a round of drinks, and then it comes to your turn. You have the moral duty to also buy a round, yeah? You can't just
Right. The
leave. That's bad.
implication. Yeah.
And then I'm like, so? And he's like, yeah, but it's you have to buy, you can't just leave. You have to buy the round. It's morally wrong to leave. It's morally right to buy the round. I'm like, what? Why is anything morally right? But let's stay within the realms of intuition for the purposes of our political philosophy and say that analogy seems convincing enough,
Yeah.
right? That analogy seems reasonable. I mean, it's only fair that you return the favor to your friends and buy them all around. If you leave, they're gonna think you're assholes. You're not. So clearly, to
Yeah.
some extent, you must be an asshole.
Exactly. There's some sort of there's like a social cue there as well. It's like it would be
Hmm.
socially apt for you to pay along and buy the round of drinks.
Yeah.
It's like an unspoken like agreement in a way.
Hmm. So that seems reasonable, but it doesn't. Hold on. I have another philosopher here who is recent. Robert Nozick lived from 1938 to 2002. This makes me happy. It makes me happy that we have philosophers from recent times because it makes me feel like I'm on the cutting edge of philosophy. Even if the things we talk about are rather simplified. But
As
yeah,
philosopher
okay.
Niki Kiiskinen once said,
What did I say?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
He
Okay.
said
I
nothing.
guess we will
He's the
we'll
worst
we'll
philosopher
see.
ever.
Oh no. Oh no, I'm such a bad philosopher. Robert Nozick. Actually, I even saw his book in the bookstore. Okay, he died in
Hmm.
2002, so he's not that recent, but he's quite recent compared to some of the other people we've been talking about. I saw his book in the bookstore, Robert Nozick, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. I was like, oh man, that looks cool, and it was like the thickest book ever. It was so thick. I was like, that's expensive. I'm not buying that. And instead got other books. But I did see it. So clearly this man is a credible philosopher.
Therefore, you're an expert on the subject matter.
Yeah, therefore I'm an expert on it. Yeah, yeah. I have somebody talking about what Robert Nozick wrote about. That's makes me an expert. I've heard somebody else's opinion of this man's writings. So yeah, that's good.
Exactly.
So okay, what does Robert Nozick argue? Robert Nozick points out that unsolicited benefits create no obligations to reciprocate. So if we go to the bar and say, you tell everyone, guys, by the way, I'm broke and I can't buy anyone drinks. And then they all proceed to buy you rounds of drinks. Do you still have the moral duty to buy a round of drinks for them as well?
Okay, well, you see, this is where I shine as a professional moocher who often...
Right.
Right, because I often have had Aqua and Dana, like, buy me things. I would say if you explicitly, state that, like, you have no money, and if other people then buy stuff for you, at least as a social, like, thing, that would be acceptable. You would not have any form of obligation there.
And if we use the same sort of, or if we have the same barrier, if we have the same limits of what we consider a good argument as we did earlier, which is social cues, really not a very good standard in my opinion.
A lot of social behavior is tied into moral behavior.
Sure, but it's not exactly philosophically.
It's not exactly philosophically sound.
Yeah, but intuition is a major way of knowing, according to philosophy. It's like we go from being so logical and scientific and reasonable, and then as we get to more fundamental issues, intuition is good enough, which is really unfortunate, but such is life sometimes. It's actually interesting how much weight philosophers give to intuition. But that's a discussion for another day. So
I might even make an episode someday.
Yeah, we could.
Talk about intuition.
In the IB, we have a subject, TOK, Theory of Knowledge, in which you have ways, you study, like, it's pretty much epistemology. You study how people come to know things and what areas of knowledge there are. And one of the ways of knowing is intuition. It's taught as a way of knowing things. It's unintuitive, yet it's so intuitive.
It is unintuitive generally to question intuition. That it's in the name.
Oh my gosh. But yeah. So using the same standards we had earlier, which is social cues, it seems that in this case, you're getting an unsolicited benefit that you explicitly did not ask for. Or more, you explicitly pointed out that even if you did receive a benefit, you wouldn't be able to pay. So in that case, you seem to lose the duty. So maybe we have to so clearly some people, again, we have the same problem as with tacit consent, where some people aren't voluntarily accepting the benefits of the state. The state is just giving them to you. Like, how can I reject these benefits? It seems that intuitively speaking, it seems that Hart's argument requires that you voluntarily accept the benefits in order to have a duty to shoulder the burden. But if we then adjust our account to, okay, you only have a duty of fairness when you accept the benefits, then we have the same problem as with tacit consent with how can you reject the benefit? It's the exact same problem. And we can't possibly show that everybody is in the country is accepting the benefits of the state. Surely it follows that there are some people in Finland who are rejecting the benefits.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. It's the type of thing where like in theory you can consent or reject the idea, but in practice it is hard to actually perform the action of either accepting or rejecting, either consenting or dissenting. It would be Like you would have to in some way display your dissent, and
Yep.
that's a hard thing
And
to. Yeah.
again, yeah, in this case, in the modern world, that's really hard. Another discussion I'm sure many philosophers have had is whether, like, the simply going back to ancient Greece does in fact create the situation where universal political obligations can come to be merely by residence, merely by accepting benefits. But in the modern world, as we talked about earlier, it just seems that this isn't the case. So, those are all the arguments I have for you. Those are all the stances on justifying the state that I have for you. And all of them seemed in some way wanting. Maybe the strongest was in fact utilitarianism. But all of them seemed insufficient in showing that everybody has a moral duty to obey the law, although they have some limited success in showing that many people do. I, for
So.
one, would explicitly consent if I could.
Mm,
The theory of hypothetical consent could very well jot me down as somebody who consents
I yeah.
and is subject to the law, for
I
example.
I too would explicitly consent to the state, perhaps simply because of my comfort within the state already, the fact that I'm used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But so
Uh,
I
it's
guess yeah.
I'm glad at least that I have received some powerful weaponry in these last two episodes with which to argue for the state being beneficial if I ever come across an anarchist.
All right.
But yeah.
So well, I mean, so if we go by the question of the episode, do you have the moral duty to obey the law? We're gonna chalk it up to a strong plausible.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people do, but you might be someone who doesn't. And that's what I wanted to talk about earlier, which I said that we'd come back to at the end of the episode, is that can the state just take that into account? I mean, first of all, even if some people escape the law, remember that that doesn't mean that the law can't protect you from them. Because if we take Locke's view of your natural rights and how, everybody has the right to punish the wrongdoer who infringes against those rights. I don't know if you remember this from last
I
episode.
do.
Yeah, where the idea was that you have natural rights and people won't infringe against them because everybody will band together to punish wrongdoers, supposedly.
Hmm.
So if we accept that we have some natural rights, even if the law sort of goes above natural rights, the law can still protect us in terms of natural rights because we seem morally justified in seeking the protection of the law to protect our natural rights because that's like the most convenient way of doing it. Like you don't have the right to kill me, even if you're outside the law, because it doesn't matter whether you're outside the law or not. If you try to kill someone, then you can be subjected to punishment for that,
Yeah.
just in
The
terms of
law
the
will
laws of
act.
nature. Yeah, well, I like use the law to punish you for infringing against the law of nature, really. But
Yeah, you're still kicking a beehive.
yeah, you could say that. Good, and use more analogies. Analogies are nice.
Analogies are
They
useful.
empower your rhetoric, and that's
Mm,
good.
yep. They give you the power of intuition on your side.
Exactly. Let's talk about Ratatouille. Who's
Let's not.
Fox Pixar?
I
Who's
don't know.
Fox Pixar in our
I don't
Twitch
know. I
chat?
don't know, but I'm not gonna click that link until the stream is over.
Sure. So, where were we? What if the state can just permit some people to escape? Okay, if it does try to do this, it's going to be really challenging. First of all,
Hmm.
because again, like we talked about earlier, people will try to take advantage of it. So, maybe it's reasonable that in practice, the state really can't just let everybody escape the law. Maybe in some very clear-cut situations. I have some examples from Mr. Wolff over here, like perhaps some monks that clearly reject state assistance can be allowed to escape some taxes.
Hmm.
Perhaps some other groups can be excused compulsory military service, like Jehovah's Witnesses escape compulsory military service, and so other religious groups. They can. So some burdens can maybe be lifted for people who reject some benefit. So that's possible. It's possible, and it happens already, and it can be developed as well. Why is this person talking about Ratatouille?
I don't
Who
know, but I
are
love
you?
it. I love them. This is exactly the type of content we need on this stream. Let's talk about Ratatouille.
Let's not talk about
Let's
Ratatouille.
talk about Ratatouille.
Earlier, you didn't want to talk about Ratatouille. Why do you now want to talk about Ratatouille?
Alright, anyways, back to the topic at hand.
Well, we've pretty much covered it all. So we can't really escape the fact that, theoretically, some people don't have the duty to obey the law. But in practice, we can't take into account all these people without bigger downsides, without bigger harms than if we just ignore them.
Right.
And it's worth biting that particular bullet in order to enjoy the rest of the advantage of the state. But as a general rule, I think that it's reasonable to try to take into account these people that reject state assistance and lift some burdens, like in the cases of monks, as mentioned previously. That seems fair, right?
That seems perfectly reasonable.
That seems fair. And as such, our clickbait has been justified.
Incredible.
Because it is in fact the case that some people don't obey the law. Oh, sorry, don't have the duty to obey the law. Well, it's also the case that people don't obey the law, but
I mean,
we're
yeah.
talking about duty. It is the case that some people don't have the duty to obey the law, and as such, government is clearly the biggest scam in here. Clearly. All right, thank you, everyone. Eric, did you have any last words?
Let's talk about Ratatouille.